Happy Halloween and welcome to the Signal Watch. I'm your ghost, Ryan Steens. Once again, our cadre of co-contributors creep from the crypt for a spooktacular season of petrifying podcasts. We're reaching into our bag of tricks to line up some horrific treats in the phantasmagoric form of films that find a peculiar perspective on familiar frights. Stay terrified. We're going to try to make it work.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack. Bella Lugos is dead. The back.
Ooh, happy Halloween. It is I, Ryan, your spooky host, and I am with...
Hello, Simon Day. Happy Halloween, everybody.
And we kind of decided to do this one out of like last minute decision, kind of as a twist on what we were kind of thinking of doing. And you pitched it and I just jumped on it with both feet once you said it out loud.
Yeah, you were very excited.
I did.
I think because I mentioned that I'd just seen the 80s remake of The Cat People at the Alamo. And you said, well, let's watch the 40s one as well and compare and contrast. So that's what we're doing. We're doing The Cat People from 1942, directed by Jacques Tournier and produced by the great Val Lewton. And we're also doing afterwards Cat People from 1982, directed by Paul Schrader, and starring the gorgeous Natasha Kinski and the always entertaining Malcolm McDowell.
So I had never seen the 1982 version. It's one of those things that
it's got 75% more tits. That's what you say. And that's a good selling point for anybody.
Well, and that was one of the things I'd always heard was you'd bring it up and people would always be like, oh, she didn't wear any clothes in that movie. And you'd be like, oh, okay, well, I need to get around to that. But then
it's very 80s as well. It's probably like almost like snapping at the heels of The Hunger for the most 80s film we've seen for a while, actually.
Oh my God. So yeah, I mean, it would have been a great pairing with that. It's directed by Paul Schrader, who you may know as the guy who wrote and directed American Gigolo, and he'd also written Taxi Driver, and the scores by Giorgio Moroder with a title song by David Bowie.
David Bowie, great song. David Bowie seemed to be having trouble doing cohesive albums in the 80s, but he produced some cracking singles for films. Like he did this. He did This Is Not America from Falcon and the Snowman. He did all the Labyrinth stuff, which I love. I don't care. Some people say it's rubbish. I love Labyrinth.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Dance, magic, dance. So yeah, he was doing some great film soundtracks around this time, and Absolute Beginners as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the 1940s version, as you said, directed by Jacques Tourneur.
Should we start with the 40s one?
I think so, because it's much easier to understand the 80s one if you've seen the 40s one.
But not as naughty.
It's an interesting comparison and contrast. And I'm currently listening to a podcast series. You must remember this is by Karina Longworth, is doing the sexy 80s. And she just did the one I just listened to. It's a couple months old now, was on Paul Schrader. And
she actually got to cat people in the next episode and was like, but we're going to skip that because we spent the whole last episode talking about Paul Schrader. But yeah, anyway, it's an interesting, I don't remember where I was going with this, but we're doing this at 10 o'clock, which we have literally never done before. So we're both punchy.
Need more coffee.
Yeah. I need to get up tomorrow for work.
We'll be all right.
Yeah.
Keep going. Keep going.
So the 1940s version comes out, and it's in the middle of the Hays Code. That's where I was going with this. The Paul Schrader version of this is Hays Codes have the doors blown off it in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
And you can do whatever the hell, say whatever the hell, make your movie about whatever the hell. Cat People in the 40s is doing all this within the context of, as I said, the Hays Code. So I am still not sure exactly what the rules are for the cat people in the first movie.
Well, we're talking werewolf metaphor, aren't we? Kind of. So we kind of got like a bit of a spin on, because, originally we set this series up as a spin on the kind of classic monsters.
Yeah.
And this is a great example because really, it's a bit of a spin on the werewolf, I guess, both the movies.
Yeah. Interestingly, if you go back and read the pre-Dracula vampire book, Carmilla, which has otherwise no relation to this at all, she doesn't turn into a wolf. She turns into a large black cat. As a vampire. Like vampires can change into various things, but they keep describing a large black cat. That's the only comparison I would make to anything else. Aside from that, I think absolutely this is some sort of wackadoodle werewolf story.
Well, apparently, so Val Lewson, who was the kind of driving force, he got a deal with RKO to develop some horror movies, like B movies for them. And they were kind of budgeted between the Poverty Row stuff but not as much money was pumped into them as the Universal stuff. So they were kind of like mid-tier kind of horror films he was asked to make. And I think he kind of was a bit cheeky, but he actually came up with much more intelligent, subtle, thoughtful films than they expected, because they really just wanted him to churn some stuff out.
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. He actually, and the only concession he had to make was literally an executive said, "I'm giving you the title, kid." Probably talk like that. The Cat People. And it actually, apparently, Val Lewson hated that title and wanted to change it, but they wouldn't let him. But of course, he crafted a great film from it.
There's actually a scene in an Academy Award-winning movie from the time called The Bad and the Beautiful, in which basically Kirk Douglas is playing Val Lewton. He's not. They don't say it, but if you were in Hollywood at the time, it was one of those stories everybody knew. Where basically they're like, "Yeah, kid, here's the title, the Jaguar People or whatever," and he's like, "Oh God, what am I going to do with this?"
Yeah.
And yeah, similar sort of following that same thread.
Yeah. Well, I know he kind of because this was like a real team effort as well, because he brought in Jack Tournier as the director. He also had Mark Robson, who was the scriptwriter. The editor. And he also had a really good kind of writer as well. And they all together, they kind of pretty much co-wrote the script. I think Val Lewson did the heavy lifting, but they put in a lot of stuff that we don't really think twice about it, but at the time it was pretty radical. They kind of threw out all the Universal horror motifs because they said we don't want to do the same things. Almost to the point where maybe they threw out too much. But they also made it contemporary. This is possibly one of the first contemporary horror films, which of course, would lead on to Rosemary's Baby and The Omen, down the future. But at the time, of course, most of this stuff was set back in, the 1800s in stormy castles.
Right.
And he actually said, I want people to kind of it to kind of affect people by making it contemporary, making them be able to identify with it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point in history too, where this is coming out, right? It's this movie comes out in 42. So you're in the middle of the war. They don't quite say outright that our lead female is a Serbian World War II refugee, but
the dodgy foreigner in both of them, isn't it? Both versions. It's the dodgy European.
Yeah. I mean, and I've definitely heard that take. I mean, I think that's a way to read it. My read on it when I've seen this, and this is probably the fourth time I've seen the 42 Cat People, has always been, well, how do you if you are bringing in witchcraft, essentially, unless you're tying it in the States to like the Salem witch trials or something, you pretty much then have to say, oh, it's something from the old world. And then everyone's like, yeah, I get it.
Well, it's a bit like they kind of did the same thing with American Werewolf, didn't they, really? It was like, send two contemporary, at the time, Americans over to England. And, and they're like, isn't everything quaint and funny? But of course, there's also like stuff going on that, isn't talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's I am totally fine with the like xenophobia sort of take on this.
Racism.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not obviously don't approve, but I also think that there's so much in the movie that's kind of saying the opposite.
Well, I totally agree with you because, like, I mean, I'm probably jumping the gun a bit here, but
Go
like
for it.
with the 40s Cat People, watching it the other night, I was struck by how kind of horrendous the Americans were. I was like, they're all like really not overstepping their boundaries and like messing with this poor girl. And I think if it had been like a modern remake, she'd have kind of probably killed them all. Probably. Because, really you got like the husband who's probably for a while he's, her best support. But even he kind of like goes off and goes, basically, I fancy this other woman. I mean, I want a divorce. You've kind of let me down because you won't have sex with me. You got the pervy psychiatrist. You got like, the kind of like the female friend of the husband who, although she's trying to stay, I guess, like maintain, a balance, she's still kind of like, has her own interests at heart. So, so I really sympathized with, the main character, Irene, where, I think originally maybe she was supposed to be the otherworldly threat to be destroyed.
Yeah, I mean, there are times definitely also where it does feel like, Americans being loud and stomping around as we tend to do.
Well, just they're always patronizing as well. They're like, hey, well, that's where you're an American now, kid. You don't have to worry about any of that, any of your funny, legends or anything. And It's like nobody really stops and listens to her,
Right. Yeah. I mean, it very much has kind of the that aspect of the werewolf tragedy to it of like, I'm going through a thing and I'm trying to tell you in a way that feels safe for me. And everyone's like, you got a head full of spiders, kid. You need to go see a shrink.
We're going to put you in an asylum. You ain't good.
Yeah. And but they do at the same time, like they take her out for their wedding dinner to a Serbian restaurant.
Yeah.
Like they're more than happy to do that. No one's saying don't marry the girl except for, wow, this is really fast. And they're mostly welcome her with open arms, except when she's acting a little nutty. And so
even that guy at dinner though, he's like, she's a bit, a bit weird, isn't she? And they're like, no, she's okay, and I'm like, well, she hasn't even done anything yet, really.
So what I found confusing, and I'm just going to throw this out there because it's going to tie into the other Cat People.
Yeah,
this movie has two hard cuts before they get married, where it definitely suggests they're having sex.
Interesting.
And That's the thing I find baffling. It feels like it almost felt like if she had sex in wedlock, it was going to be a problem, or else there was no penetration that occurred or something in the prior whatever encounters. Like he goes into her apartment and then they cut to black and then they cut back in and it's dark and they're in her apartment talking about how they've totally lost track of time.
I didn't see that myself as a sex scene. I felt like that was just like him kind of like, I guess chancing his luck really with her. And then, we start to see that there's something a little bit strange about her.
Simon, that's how it passed the Hays Code.
Well, I mean, just like rationally though, they can't have had sex because that would go against everything in the film, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing. So the director Jacques Tourneur is the same guy who directed the noir kind of Ground Zero in Out of the Past. Like if anybody knew how to code fade to black, you guys know they're boning, right? Fade back in. It was kind of him. And so that's where weird. Yeah. So I kind of choose to believe that they didn't have actual sex in those.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Just so in both films, if she gets aroused, she turns into a cat, and then they have to kill somebody to turn back into a human.
Well, that's kind of more the 1982 cat people. This one's like way more flexy because there's definitely the suggestion when she's chasing down Alice that she turns into a cat.
But isn't that also in the 80s one? Because when she's in the swimming pool.
Yeah, and it doesn't make any sense based on the rules that they set up.
Also, it's like I'm like I have a real problem as I get older with people turning into animals and then reappearing with their clothes immaculate. I really, that's why I like David Norton running around a zoo, because it makes a lot more sense. So yeah, there's definitely plot holes in both of them, I think.
Yeah, so I think that this one, it's almost more like if she has serious emotions.
She also seems to. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
I also feel like in this one, she knows a lot more. In the 80s one, Natasha Kinski's basically has to wait to almost the last third of the film for a dreamlike exhibition download from Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah.
Which again, I'm not sure where that came from because he didn't tell her that while he was alive. But then in this one, she seems to like know what she is and the problems that it entails and what she can do and what she can't do.
Yeah, because to me, the story of this one is she came to the States to kind of, I want to be alone. And it's
a great accent.
And so that was her plan. She was going to live and die on her own. And then she meets this guy who seems like he's super understanding, played by Kent Smith.
Well, she's just lonely, isn't she, I suppose?
Right. And I think she's like, well, maybe I can keep it under control with this guy and I can make it work. And then she realizes after the wedding, like, oh, this is going to take me time. Yeah. And then realizes, oh, this isn't happening.
Yeah.
And so it's her personal horror, that kind of great werewolf movie, personal horror of what's happening.
Yeah.
But on a different level than, oh, I've become a monster. She already is. She's trying. She was trying to be a good monster, right?
I mean, she's kind of in denial of what she really is, isn't she?
The relationship she has with the zoo and the panther there is, of course, wildly different from what we'll see in the 80s version.
You tell me this because I kind of had a bit of trouble with that because, like, I thought the endings. So I've a lot more of a problem with the 80s ending, which I think is incredibly sexist. Whereas in the 40s one, it's almost like, one of those, like, we can't have the at least what we think are the heroes killing her, because that would morally tarnish them. So we'll just have this random act where she accidentally gets swiped by another panther. And that kind of like, and she's probably already been stabbed by the psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So that will just kind of finish her off almost by accident. So everybody remaining alive is kind of in the clear, you know?
Well, one of the things you'll find interesting too with the 1940s version, which I do not understand this, what is considered to be a bonus to the film, is, and I think I know why people think this. Some people think that she never does become a cat herself. That, you know how she has a key at the end to release the panther?
Yeah.
That like she's somehow sneaking this panther around.
See, I don't buy that.
I don't either. But there's people who are like, well, because you don't know at the end if she was a panther or not, you know, if she was an actual cat person or whether it was all in her mind.
I mean, I think it definitely plays with well, no, because there's two dead panthers at the end, isn't there? There's one gets run over.
Well, she's laying in the street as a person at the end.
Is she?
Yeah.
I thought there was a panther under the bus. And
she is stabbed by George Saunders' brother. Who's playing the psychologist. So that's how you know for a fact.
Somebody should be struck off, basically.
Yeah. So she goes to the zoo as like her final act. She's going to free the cat. And
so what I saw, I'll tell you what I saw.
Okay.
You tell me if I tell you this something, because I might have done. Yeah. She opens a cage.
Mm-hmm.
Panther kind of like bounced past and probably swipes her.
Yes.
Jumps over the wall. That panther gets run over because you hear a bus skid, and then like husband and his bit of stuff turns up, and then they go into the zoo, find her dead, they find another panther dead by the cage, and they go, oh, she was telling the truth. So isn't there two panthers at the end?
They see that. No, there's not.
Oh,
well, now I have to go back and watch the end. But
I just made that up.
I think you might have. She is laying there, and the panther, and so it gives the impression that she didn't do it because there was a panther on the loose because this panther got run over.
See, I was thinking if she is in human form at the end, even if she's dead, surely she's got like part of the psychiatrist's sword sticking out of her.
She does. She, in fact, has it sticking out of her side. Yeah.
And they know that he was killed by a panther.
Yeah.
So when they say she was telling the truth, they're saying she did turn into a panther. She was afflicted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess you could read it several ways if you wanted to.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why people keep coming back. I watched this movie like twice, and I'll be honest, I probably had gotten my phone out or my computer and just wasn't watching it, and I didn't really get it the first two times I watched it as to like why do people.
It's quite slow, isn't it?
It's also slow, you know? Yeah, I think it would have been great in the theater where you have no other distractions, but so somebody was talking about it a few years ago, and I was like, fine, like I gotta just make it through this thing. So like the last 2 or 3 years, I finally just sat down and watched it, and I was like, this is an incredible movie. I was wrong. You know, I have to be the first one to admit that. And I think the cinematography in it is mind-boggling in this thing. It's just a beautiful movie.
But also the fact that in the 80s version, I know, Paul Schrader said this. He said, we copied the swimming pool scene, and we literally copied it note for note because we couldn't improve upon it. It was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is like, not many directors would say that. They'd normally go, well, of course, back then they couldn't do this, and now we can make it even better. But he was like, no, we couldn't make it any better, so we just copied it completely.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost to the point, like you were saying, well, why is that scene doesn't make any sense in that movie? And I think Schrader just really wanted to recreate that scene.
Yeah. We get to see Annette O'Toole's breasts, which is amazing.
Annette O'Toole, we'll spend 30 minutes discussing.
She's gorgeous.
Just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. Yes. And that's a crazy thing to say when you've just been watching Natasha Kinski run around, and
Yeah.
we're all together for however long.
Yeah.
But
apparently, just a slight digression. I know I'm talking about the 80s film, and I shouldn't be.
That's totally fine.
But the girl or the actress who played the prostitute who fell down the stairs in the first Panther attack in the 80s version, she said, so I did that without pads. Obviously, I did my own stunt because I couldn't wear pads because I was only wearing lingerie. And she said, and then Paul Schrader said, when you hit the last step, I want your bra to pop open. And she goes, I thought that was ridiculous. But apparently, they were trying to get shots of the tits of every actress in that film. And I don't know if that was an executive decision or a director decision. But yeah, it seems to be kind of like an epidemic, really. Which, once you know that story and you start watching it, you're like, yeah, that's kind of true. That's it.
Well, I will say when I was watching it and knowing full well about Natasha Kinski and what was coming with Annette O'Toole, I definitely had a passing thought of, Schrader. And plus, I just been listening to that sexy 80s, and kind of Schrader's interesting sexuality.
It's almost like a spoof once you start watching it. It's like there's so much,
Oh, it's mind-boggling. Yeah. I mean, unless you go to like a straight-up art film where it's like, people speaking in poems when they're like nude.
I suppose you do have Malcolm McDowell nude as well, so it balances out a little bit, but not much. So, and do you really want to see that anyway?
I was going to say, I think it's a very different sell. Except for maybe Mrs. McDowell. Yeah, and anyway, I just think that the 40s version, if it's you've not seen it,
there's a lot going on, and not necessarily horror, but it's just like it's really interesting. I mean, watching it, I really enjoyed it, but I was also like, it's kind of depressing because you're kind of watching a marriage fail for the first 2/3, and nobody's kind of really to blame. You can kind of see all their points of view a little bit. But then, also you have this psychological drama where you kind of know that she does really have this affliction. But of course, there's no way of proving it without killing people. So,
right.
So, and then of course you throw in this corrupt psychiatrist who's just trying to get, I'm not quite sure what he's after, whether he's just attracted to her or he's just like power mad, but I mean, he obviously doesn't make things better. But it's very interesting to watch because, like you say, they're doing a lot of I guess tell not show instead of show not tell.
Yeah, there's a lot of wink wink nod nod in the movie. But it also does some stuff that other horror movies then picked up on that you hadn't quite seen done that way. Like it has the sequence where Alice and Oliver are walking and they part ways. And then Irina is following Alice down the sidewalk.
Yeah.
Remarkably well shot film. You can't believe it's not actually New York when they, in the park when they do it.
And they actually steal that as well for the remake. Where they not as good, but they have Annette O'Toole jogging for the park. Because again, very powerful seeing the work so well originally, they kind of stole it.
Yeah.
I mean,
go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's a lot going on that I think takes a few viewings to actually get, because it is incredibly intelligent. And, it's been thought out very cleverly, not just to get around the Hays Code, like you said, but like to actually, you're dealing with intelligent, creative people kind of going, we're not just going to do the fangs and the rubber bats that everybody else is doing. We're actually going to try to make an intelligent film here.
Yeah. And and when we're talking about the 80s version, we can talk about kind of where that worked and where it didn't. But
Well, I like to contrast both these because I feel like the 80s version is almost like complete style over substance. So it's almost like the opposite. It's the flip side. So it is very interesting comparing them, I think.
go for it.
Well, actually, just a little thing, just to finish off the 40s one. There is like one bit where he does ward her off with a cross, like a vampire.
Yeah.
And I think that was the only concession I really saw to what was going on with Universal at the time. Because, like we said, the rest of it is, it's contemporary setting. And I think maybe was this before Son of Dracula that we saw the other kind of Halloween?
I think it was by a few years. I think so. If I had to make a guess about
that's where Dracula's worried about being pulled over for speeding, wasn't it?
I don't have my license, blah. But yeah, if I had to guess, one of the major forces within the kind of the enforcement of the Hays Code was the Catholic League, and I'm guessing one of the ways they got away with we can show it's like witchcraft or whatever is if you show like something religious will thwart it.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Actually, that's a really good explanation because I think that went right up even to almost the 60s, didn't it?
Yeah.
Where it's like you had to have Van Helsing, grab his candlesticks and make the sign of the cross because that's how we get away with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's some of it became so embedded in like vampire lore from the books and the films and whatnot. Here, I think they borrowed it. And tried to do it as artfully as possible. It's not like the guy holds up the T-square thinking of it that way. We don't. It's the cue to us is his shadow that's thrown behind him on the wall that makes it into a crucifix or a cross. And so it's when he picks up the T-square and cat people, it's nothing. The cat bats it away, and it's a clear shrug to the original. Like it's like, well, you didn't really think like that was gonna work. We're dealing with a biological thing here that's quasi mystical.
It's almost postmodern, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like it's like in those kind of vampire films where they go like, really, silver bullets, really,
Yeah.
We also kind of forgot to mention this. Also, I think originated the loot and bus, which is what they call the jump scare, which is actually in both movies. The less successful in the remake, but it's basically where I think is it Alice is kind of like I think it is when she thinks she is being followed, and suddenly a bus pulls up in front of her and like squeals its brakes, and of course they would have made everybody jump at the time, and it still does, still works very well. And of course, we're so used to jump scares and everything, paranormal activity. That's about all it's got, right?
Yeah.
That you don't think where it came from, but I think this is where it actually came from.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we actually seen a cat used for that, right? I mean, it's it's part of that remarkable sequence. One of the things with Alice I find that works much better in this version than the 80s version is, I mean, it kind of almost doesn't work because Oliver and Alice get along so well, like obviously that it doesn't.
Gotta say his full name is Oliver Reed, which made me chuckle as well.
Yes.
I was like, I wish it was Oliver Reed. That'd be a very different film, actually.
Well, you're just fighting with the panther.
He'd end up drunk and naked wrestling the panther at the end of it.
But Alice and he clearly get along, like very, very well. And I understand, like you can work with someone.
Why hasn't he gone out with her before?
That's what you cannot. She's clearly into him. She says as much.
Yeah.
I mean, she says very specifically, "I love you," and he's like, "Oh, weird."
Which I think is why watching it this time, I was like, "These people are all dicks." I mean, I feel sorry for Irina because she's she's foreign and she's cursed, and she's doing all the wrong things. But like these people are like trying to lock her up and like stealing her husband, and they're doing it very nicely, but they're still doing it.
Well, they take her to the boat museum or whatever.
Yeah, and they dump her.
Yeah, they're like, you go run and play.
She literally says, "I want to stay with you, my husband."
Yeah,
and they're like, "Okay, anyway, we're going to go and look at this boat." Yeah.
So at some point, she has every right to turn into a panther and murder everybody.
Yeah, which sadly she doesn't manage, but it's funny. Like, so I felt very that way about the original film, which probably wasn't how original audiences were supposed to feel. I'm sure they were supposed to be like, the good guys, the modern American guys have triumphed over the weird lady. But also when I saw the remake, I actually sympathized with Malcolm McDowell because I'm like, is a bit of sex with your sister really that bad compared to killing all these people? It's like all he wants to do. He actually says a couple of times, "I don't want to kill anybody anymore."
It is a complicated ass movie, that 82 Cat People.
I mean, God knows what it says about Paul Schrader, but it's like, yeah. And apparently, bit of trivia, he had an affair with Natasha Kinski during the film. Who wouldn't? Let's be honest. And but she didn't turn up to the rap party. He proposed to her, and she disappeared. And 3 months after the film, he tracked her down to Paris, and she was a bit nasty to him and said, "I sleep with all my directors, and it wasn't much fun with you, or you were one of the worst."
Oh man!
Which made me go, "Blimey!" That blew away my conception of Natasha Kinski as this pure, innocent 20-year-old who was kind of like maybe being told to exploit a bit in this film. I'm like, no, I don't think so. I actually started feeling a bit sorry for Paul Schrader after that.
Yeah, I mean, the 82 Cat People, like we said kind of at the top, I'd heard about it, probably since high school or early college.
It was never a naughty film, though. It was never like one of those kind of like, hey, I got to watch that when I'm a teenager. Maybe it wasn't on TV enough.
So I found out through a completely random circumstance, Danny, who I'm doing the Inhumans podcast and the superheroes every day, today on his blog covered what the box office was for Swamp Thing when that came out, which was the same year. That made 6.4 million, and this movie made like 7 million. Like, this movie didn't do very well when it came out.
And we should say the original did. The original was actually one of the bigger hits of the year for RKO in the 40s. And that led to Val Lewton being able to make a lot more kind of his films in his style, like I Walked with the Zombie and stuff. But you're right. I think this one, the remake, the 80s Cat People, it's funny because Universal had bought up RKO, their library, and they started kind of saying, hey, we're going to remake all the horror movies, starting with The Thing and Cat People. And of course, they both bombed, so they stopped that pretty quickly. Hey, I say more for them because I enjoy both of those films very much.
I think this movie, in some ways, was ahead of what the audience was ready for. It does some things that aren't great, but it also only could have ever been made within about an 8-year window.
And it's almost like an art. It's a lot like The Hunger. It is kind of like a very artful horror film. I think sometimes I agree with you. Sometimes I think the script kind of slips and there's some awful dialogue in the script. But I think they do a really good idea of expanding that original 40s film in other directions.
Yeah, I mean the biggest change really there's kind of two really big changes, and one is they remove whatever was going on with the origins with King John and cats and witches in Serbia.
Which now is probably good because that's kind of a bit cheesy now, isn't it?
I mean, I don't know if it's any cheesier than what we're told. It's
So there's this kind of fantasy land that we're shown where people seem to spend their time polishing rocks until they get dragged away if they're attractive and made to like go into a panther cave where for stupid people they've drawn a picture of a panther outside the cave, which I love, just in case. And then I'm not sure what happens in the cave. Do they have sex with the panther? I'm not sure.
I can't tell you now. By the time the movie finished, and I had I kept going. Wait, wasn't there kind of a fantasy sequence at the beginning of this?
Yeah. And then there's kind of one later on with McDowell as well, where he kind of does some exposition, even though he's died by that point. So I'm not quite sure how he manages that. But
I got some theories, but
she kind of gets some information that could have been a lot more useful earlier.
Yeah, but they take the panther that is a regular old plain panther from the first movie that gets run over by a car, and they go, well, she has this relationship with this panther. Let's turn it into another cat person. And if there's another cat person, and clearly in the first movie she can't seem to have sex with her husband, or she'll turn into a panther. What can we do with that if that's true for both of them?
Well, apparently they were worried making this. I'm surprised they were worried about anything after watching this. But they were worried about having a sexually intense woman kind of destroyed, how it would play and whether it would look, sexist. So they said that's why they brought in and kind of made up the McDowell character of, she's got a brother who's got the same affliction.
Yeah, I mean, and it narratively, I mean, it's completely spins the original story in ways that end up, in some ways, I think, taking up a lot of time and maybe not. They managed to be able to tell what's going on with her through him, which is much more narratively convenient than her sitting on her sofa telling the story, which is what we get in the first movie.
Yeah. Totally. Because, I mean, otherwise it would just be her walking around looking sad, wouldn't it, really? And like I say, hey, Matt, I don't know what this says about me at the age I'm at, but I sympathize with Malcolm McDowell in this, I'm like, the dude keeps saying, look, help me, help yourself, help everybody else. Just have sex with me. Save me, make love to me. And haven't we all used that line at some point? Worth a try.
Yeah, I mean it's a movie that takes place in this kind of realm of taboo pretty much like right out of the gate. I mean, she's in his house for, I don't know, maybe in the first 5-10 minutes of the movie when he starts like nuzzling her and you're like, wait, what?
Well, first they do some creepy circus stuff, some juggling, joint juggling. I can't even say it. Joint juggling. And
what he wants to do with her is joint juggling.
Joint juggling. That's even better. That's more fun. But yeah, it's kind of like, and it's set in New Orleans, so that gives it kind of like a weird twang as well. One of the worst lines later from John Hurd is, "Hey, there's an alligator outside. The way to keep them away from you is you have to make love." And I'm like, that's terrible script writing, whoever did that. So,
but it also sounds totally like a line from a movie from 1982.
Yeah, it does actually.
But the cast in this thing is crazy. I've got it open, so I'm just going to yell out some names. But you have Natasha Kinski, Malcolm McDowell, John Hurd, Annette O'Toole, Ed Begley Jr., Ruby Dee, Frankie Faison, John Larroquette. You have you'll know him if you saw him, Scott Powell, who was in Right Stuff and Pump Up the Volume.
Did you also see Ray Wise on the TV in the soap opera?
Yes, which made me think he was going to pop up later. And then I realized, his big break would come shortly with Swamp Thing. So he probably did this for like a day and then ran off to go do Swamp Thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true. Um, and like the actors in this, I think it's funny. So John Hurd apparently nearly turned this down because he thought it was a porno. I don't know if that makes him a bit stupid, but because I'm like, well, it's got proper actors and a proper director. But then straight after that, I thought, but Malcolm McDowell had just done what's that terrible Roman film he did?
Oh,
Caligula.
Caligula, yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, maybe Malcolm McDowell's not the best gate.
Well, and Annette O'Toole, I think at this point would have been known if she was known. Was 48 Hours already out yet? I mean, that would have been
Yeah,
so,
yeah. I think that was about the year before.
yeah.
And
maybe Superman 3's coming on the heat.
Yeah, that'll be
like
probably
just before,
just
right
after
after.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah. But there's a lot of there's also a lot of like arm. It was almost like a Star Wars film. There's a lot of arm trauma. There's so many torn off arms in this.
yeah.
They're all over the place.
You just knew Ed Begley Jr. was going to lose a limb. Like,
Well, he's
jump.
not being a particularly good zookeeper anyway, so he kind of deserves it. He's winding up the McDowell, the furry McDowell. That's
So,
why
yeah,
if I had a band, I'd call them the furry McDowells.
but it does do some interesting stuff. Like we talked earlier about the hooker and
It does some interesting stuff, but it also does some really stupid stuff, doesn't it? Because like I'm thinking of the scene where he does the autopsy on the panther after McDowell, and it's supposed to be McDowell who's like died in panther form, and this arm kind of flops out, and then the whole thing melts, and I'm like, that's so schlocky, and it doesn't make any sense. Are you saying there's a tiny Malcolm McDowell stuck in a panther every time he transforms? Because I saw it more like a werewolf, like he literally changes.
Man, I had a lot of questions about that. I couldn't figure out if that was supposed to be something he ate or if that was his own arm or what the hell that was supposed to be.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. That could be something he ate, actually. Yeah. Yeah. That could be Ed Begley Jr.'s arm.
Yeah. still digesting.
No wonder Malcolm McDowell's acting is so over the top. If he's like, if he's got bad digestion like that.
Look, I've got an arm shoved in my intestine. But yeah, it does some interesting stuff, like the with setting up the notion of like really running with it. Of if I do this, if I feel lust or whatever, I will turn into a panther. So you have that whole sequence where he can't not be a panther until he's killed, which sets up all the rules for the movie, which is a really interesting way to roll them out. And it also manages to introduce, I was like, because I couldn't figure out, like, are they going to be boat draftsmen again in this? Like, what are they going to be? And then they all roll up as zookeepers, and I was like, okay, that's cute. That makes sense.
Well, also, I think that's why I sympathize with McDowell a bit, because even when he's with the kind of woman he picks up at the cemetery, he kind of says, every time I do this, I hope it's going to be different. Yeah. So he doesn't strike me as like, I'm relishing what I am and I'm really enjoying being evil. He is like trying to kind of stop or change. He doesn't want this to go on,
Yeah, it's a lot more in the spirit of, from the first film. But the tortured, the monster is being tortured by their affliction.
Yeah. Like he even tries to get her to kill him, and I think she very cruelly just slashes him and runs off.
Yeah.
That's why I feel like, in this film, Natasha Kinski's character is, actually a bit of an arse, really. Because I mean, like, I totally get the fact that, your brother popping up and saying he needs to sleep with you because you're both cursed is a bit of a shock. But compared to all the carnage that goes on, otherwise, it seems like not that bad to me. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think there's with her versus in the first movie, like I said, laid out kind of what I thought her chain of thought was is, maybe it won't happen, maybe I can contain it or whatever with modern psychology or whatever.
Well, also there's that weird bit at the end of the film where it's like, oh, sorry, you're talking about the first film?
But yeah, but then in this film, I think she doesn't have any proof. She's a virgin. Like,
yeah,
she's going to, and they keep saying, well, we don't think it's really your brother. We don't think it's really your brother.
And they do play her younger in this, I think, because Natasha Kinski was obviously 20, which actually shocked me because I presumed before I looked that up she was like probably approaching 30 in age, but no, she was really young doing this, which I think, when you watch it made me respect her a lot more because, she actually does switch from innocent to menacing very well.
Yeah, no, I mean she's got it. She's talented, and it's kind of weird because she was one of those names you always heard, but I just never saw her in much. I mean, she wasn't doing a lot of art films and stuff like that, but I'm looking right now at her IMDb, and it's like, yeah, I've not even heard of 80% of these movies, which maybe they were all British or European.
I'm guessing European because, also, even at this time, when it was like, a lot more actresses were willing to kind of take their clothes off, and compared to like now, where nobody seems to say, hey, I'm not doing that anymore. But it's like, even back then, I think she kind of stood out as, oh, she's European, so she'll strip off at a moment's notice, kind of like in anything.
Yeah, I mean, like it or not, that certainly was a known thing at that time.
Yeah. And apparently she said, so a couple of bits of trivia about this film. One of them is said she went to the producer and said she didn't want, some of the full frontal stuff being shown. And I'm like, how much stuff must they have shot compared to what we see? Because we see pretty much everything. So it's like, how much worse could it get? And the other thing was apparently she's friends with Jodie Foster, and they kind of did a podcast a few years ago. And Jodie Foster was saying, I really like cat people. You were great in cat people. And Natasha Kinski wasn't a fan of it, not because of what you'd think, saying, oh, I was exploited, or they kind of like, they tricked me into the, too many nude shots or whatever. But actually, she said, I just didn't like it because it was like too Hollywood and too slick and too kind of like polished, really, compared to the films I normally like doing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The fact that she didn't have any problems with the nudity or anything is more the fact that she just didn't like the Hollywood system.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because this was not a big budget movie. They shot in New Orleans for a reason. And Schrader was not, you're talking the studio system in 82, which, kind of was starting to do like the blockbuster thing. This was not going to be that. This was going to just get dumped into cinemas and, see whatever they could do.
This is almost like when they do pluck a kind of artistic director and give him kind of like what they think is going to be a box office hit, isn't it?
Yeah. No, that's an astute observation. Yes, I think that's exactly what this is.
And he's probably going, it would look good on my CV, or it would allow me to make my films easier in the future. But of course, then it wasn't a hit.
Yeah, and it's one of those things of, people still talk about it today, but that's kind of 82. You're just getting into homes all having HBO, and you're getting into, people starting to get, tape decks. This thing was in every video store ever, which is part of why I'm shocked. I'd never seen it before.
Yeah, me too. Actually, me too.
But I think probably it didn't have anybody in it. I don't think I was aware of anybody big being in it except for Annette O'Toole and Natasha Kinski. And then when we talked about doing it, I actually looked at the IMDb and I was like, what the hell? How have I never seen this? And then the credits roll at the opening and I was like, Giorgio Moroder, like what? like people
Well,
just don't
so
talk about
yeah.
this all that much.
I mean, I now it's almost like our perfect film.
Yeah.
But like, I think I was the same as you. I think it wasn't shown on TV much, if at all. Or I missed the couple of times it was on. And I think also maybe it was a bit too arty for me back in the time. If I was happy watching my Aliens and The Fly, maybe this was a bit too kind of like, hey, this is like, are they trying to like say something here? Are they trying to be artistic?
Yeah. I think if you were to come into it, I mean, it takes a while for you really have to get to the scene where Malcolm McDowell returns and tries to rape Irina.
Yeah.
Before you really get into kind of, oh, now we're into the horror movie part of this. Before that, it's just kind of a confusing series of events that makes a lot of sense if you've seen the original Cat People.
Mm.
And I think if you came to it cold, you'd be like, well, that's happening, and now that's happening, and all
Yeah.
right. Um,
Also, his escape from the zoo and the fact that he keeps turning up in like, cool kind of like, trench coats and stuff. I mean, again, plot holes, plot holes.
yeah.
Because I mean, even if you turn into a man at the zoo, how do you get through the bars? And there's just so much going on that is unanswered, really.
Yeah, I think that was a quite gaping plot hole you could have driven a truck through. Like I did not get like there it still has a key that you have to have turned, and
Yeah,
unless the
yeah.
key was attached to the arm you just ate, I'm not sure how you got it, but and I don't think the door was even hanging open when they returned to the room.
No. And it was almost like the panther had melted like it does later because there was kind of all goo in the middle of the cell.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I guess that's the residue of his transformation, but then he still would have been in there, wouldn't he? I don't know.
Yeah, you got me. Paul Schrader has not asked me to correct or critique his film. I don't know
And
what
we already mentioned it, but later on with the pool scene, Irina, obviously, and now too was in the pool being stalked by the panther. And then suddenly Irina walks in, fully dressed and perfectly immaculate, which is actually the same as the 40s one. But again, makes no sense really.
Yeah, the only thing they do in the 40s is sometimes she has mud on her coat after she's been a panther. That's it. And in this one, they don't really do. I mean, she comes back from hunting the bunny, and she's
Yeah,
completely
she's kind
covered
of
in
naked
blood.
then.
Yeah.
She takes a nightdress off, I guess. But yeah, the rest of the times, yeah, yeah.
I also want to point out that John Hurd's character is remarkably okay with the fact that he woke up, she was stark naked and covered in blood, yells, "Don't look at me," and runs out of the room. And then they just smash cut to whatever's going on the next day. And I was like, no, you're up all night at this point.
Well, he's
Like,
annoyingly obsessed. And I'm not saying Natasha Kinski is hard to look at, but the dude's got like Annette O'Toole throwing herself at him. I'm like, come on, dude, wake up. It's like, it's like that's enough for any man. Or maybe I'm just getting desperate, I don't know. But it's like, but yeah, I mean he's not got his head in the right place, really.
no, and
Although I guess they do a nice flip on the original film, because instead of him going, actually I love my best friend, and I'm rejecting you, this foreign woman, it's kind of the other way around, isn't it?
yeah, the ending of it we is
I have a real problem with this
way
ending.
different. Yeah, go ahead and talk about it, please.
I don't know. It's just like, I don't often get hit with the kind of, the sexist stick, and I don't often find myself upset by stuff, but it just didn't sit right with me the end of this at all, because it feels like I think it's like, because you pretty much go from she got away scot free, really, and then she has her weird dream on the train of Malcolm McDowell saying, here's an exposition dump of what you are and what we are. So you need to go back. And I'm like, why? Why does she? Because she doesn't seem to really love John Hurt as much as he. I keep saying John Hurt nearly. I'm terribly drunk. John Hurt, but she doesn't seem to like care about him as much as he's obsessed with her. But she goes back. Um, she nearly kills him in panther form, but then doesn't because don't they make love? I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Then she comes back again, and he ties her up, bit kinky, and they have sex. And she's like, basically, I want to stay a panther. And then he ends up just basically visiting her in the zoo while he's in an unhappy relationship with Annette O'Toole. And he's like, I'll come and see you every day and bring you frozen mice or something. And it's like, I'm like, that's not a good ending for her, is it? She's kind of stuck in panther form forever. Just because the world can't handle it and he can't handle it. I don't know.
I think the logic of it, because I was a little surprised by what they
Because surely aren't they going to declaw her and fold down her teeth? And it's like it's not going to be a very nice existence there.
Well, I mean, also that zoo is remnant of pre WPA zoos, so it's not a nice zoo. But I did check the website for the Audubon Zoo, and the animal enclosures are much nicer now.
Yeah.
But
I guess it feels like it's almost like a male fantasy. It's like I've fucked the person, the woman who I've been trying to fuck the whole film, and now I'm just going to lock her in this cage, carry on with my life.
I think that's a completely fair reading. I think it was trying to do this thing where it was like, oh, they're all cursed and damned, and he can't ever, in order to protect the woman he loves, he can't be with the woman he loves, but he can see her every day as this panther. But if she were to return to human form, then she's psychologically tortured by what she is, and this is more merciful. All of which takes you right back full circle to what you were saying. And oh, boo hoo, you have to go home to Annette O'Toole. My heart freaking cries for you, dude.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think I would have just preferred almost like an American Werewolf kind of ending where maybe they do have sex or whatever, and then she changes, and he's like, "Hey, it's still me," but then the animal part of her is too strong, and he has to shoot her because she attacks him.
Well, and let me look up. So American Werewolf had been released the year before.
Yeah.
My guess is that probably kept that
copy the
ending
end
from
of American
happening.
Werewolf.
Yeah, and because it's the natural progression, and my guess is they had to come up with something that wasn't that. And they'd already used the ending of the first one for taking out Malcolm McDowell's character.
Yeah.
So,
and I can see your argument for the John Hurts kind of like version, but it just seems really sexist every time I watch it. Like that last 10 minutes is just like, we're going to have sex. I'm going to tie you up so you're not a danger to me. And then I'm going to stick you in the zoo for the rest of your natural life.
Well, what you don't get is her telling him to do that.
Yeah.
And I think
that's true.
I think if they had through some nonverbal cues or a couple of verbal cues, and he, but instead it seems like it's his plan. She's completely at the end of her rope, so to speak.
Yeah, and literally.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it the best you can say is it seems consensual while it's happening, but it's
also like a kind of male fantasy though, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I've done this thing for I mean, but you're also then for the rest of her life now removing her agency, and she's gonna have to eat raw meat off a cement floor. I mean, and I don't know if that's great, but there's the assumption that like she couldn't go on like get back on the train, as you kind of asked about earlier, and just kind of go on and like, okay, well, I'm gonna, much like the first movie, live my life as, you know,
Well, you know what is,
asexual
you know
being.
what kind of pisses me off, I think, actually, and this could just be me. It's the same as the end of No Time to Die, where instead of James Bond going like, "Hey, I'm gonna like maybe not see the people I love, but work on a cure to this thing, this virus I have in me." He just gives up, and I'm like, and I feel like it's the same with this. They just kind of she gives up, and
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
like,
I totally see your point. Yeah,
yeah,
it does have that.
and I'm like, has she really earned the right to give up? Because for most of the film, she didn't even believe this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing takes place in like a month.
Yeah. So it's a
So
very quick swap from her seeing, I guess Malcolm Dale, like, his final kind of like, angry tirade, and then, he gets shot as a panther falling out the window. And then, she gets on the train. She has a dream about him telling her, all the information. And then she seems to come back and decide this, almost on a coin toss,
yeah,
which just didn't work for me. Maybe that's just bad script writing. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's all legitimate. I didn't, when I watched the ending of it, I was not blown away by what they decided. I thought it was a little gross. But it was,
Yeah.
that's kind of
Yeah.
how it landed with me, was like, ugh, I don't know. Like, I don't feel it's poetic. I don't feel like it's even like a horror thing. It just felt squicky.
Yeah. Yeah. It just
Yeah,
doesn't track really.
yeah.
But there is a lot to like in this, I think. I think while it definitely isn't as intelligent as the 40s one, um, I think in some ways it is better. I mean, stylistically, I think it's actually, some bits in it are very impressive. I kind of like the fact that you never see the full transformation, because I feel around this time you did have American Werewolf and the Howling going on. So rather than try to compete with that, you just kind of see, have, the old thing like the contact lenses or whatever. And that's actually pretty effective. Um, and I think, I think the performances are really good as well. I think, Natasha Kinski's great, Um, well, obviously I love me some Malcolm McDowell. He's pretty much on he's on like, full Malcolm McDowell gear change. But it definitely works for this. Um and there's a lot of interesting kind of directorial ideas in here as well. I really like it.
Yeah, I would definitely watch this again. I dug it. Of course, never feel like when I watch something the first time I got all of it, unless you're talking about a really simplistic movie. But I would, I enjoyed the performances, and it kind of being this, there are no rails because it's 1982 and it's a rated R movie. It's a lot more dangerous than when you would get out of a movie, most movies that are rated R today.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, somebody actually said that. I think in the comments section or something I was reading, where they said if they made this now, it would be a PG-13, and it'd be totally bloodless, and it'd probably be like a couple of teenagers. It would actually be Twilight. It'd be bloody Twilight.
yeah, yeah. You're not wrong, man.
Do you see my thought processes just leapt for me there from Toadstool to Toadstool until I got to Twilight very quickly. But yeah, I mean that's it. I mean that's all the horror would be drained out, and there wouldn't be anything erotic or interesting or kind of even disgusting left. I liked a detail that I liked, but also thought was disgusting, but was like, what was that kind of slime? That do cats actually produce that? Almost like they,
I I assumed it was supposed to be some leftover residue from the whatever happened when they changed.
yeah. I'm not
But
sure if cats actually kind of throw that up, if that's a real thing or
cats throw up all the
all the
time,
time.
which is why you don't have a cat anymore. Uh, so maybe it was that's what they call a hairball. But
Yeah,
yeah, but she didn't produce any slime, I noticed. So they were
that's
they were
true.
they were
She's
making it
busy.
still be sexy.
Yeah, yeah. It wouldn't be as sexy if she was lick your own slime off her.
Yeah. So
but yeah, no, I recommend both of these, and I think they're lovely. They're a lovely complement of each other. Similar to like maybe the Thing from Another World and John Carpenter's The Thing. They've definitely taken the same idea, but kind of definitely done different things with it. But then also, kept the same through line, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, I felt deeply spoiled on the 82 Cat People from knowing especially since I only watched it like 3 days before. But the 42 Cat People. But yeah, you hear about the Val Lewton movies. I've only seen a few of them. I've enjoyed every one of them I've seen. Simon has the Val Lewton box set. I'm going to probably seek it out.
Maybe on Halloween we should just do Val Lewton.
Hey, there's going to be a Halloween 2023 if all goes well.
As opposed to one Halloween doing all Malcolm McDowell horror films, which that would be like Halloween 3. That would be the last Halloween, I think, if we did that.
But anyway, I think that's about it for this one. I really appreciate y'all sticking with us. Simon, I know it's late at night and you got to get up in a few hours to go to work, so thank you for sticking with.
It's been a pleasure.
We will be back. I think maybe we're doing another Halloween movie or two, but we've done a lot, so I'm not sure what's going on. But anyway, happy Halloween, everybody. I hope it's been fun hanging with us for cat people and cat people.
Thank you. Happy Halloween. Bye.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.